What's up, everybody? Today we are back in the shop creating a one-handed scythe. I know it's been a very long time since I've created anything, and I'm sorry about that. I got very busy and I lost a lot of footage of the previous knife I was working on, making it so that I would have to restart. So I did, and we're going to work on this. I put this little piece of tape sometimes on the end because that bar likes to slide, just so you can know what I'm doing right there, because that might look a little bit weird. And also, it's raining outside if you can hear. We're going to start off this by cutting a slice off the right hand side of this chisel plow blade, and then after that we will go and forge it and do all that stuff and handle it and stuff like that. As a bladesmith, I get to do a lot of cool things. I get to see a lot of sparks and smash metal. Super satisfying when sparks fly everywhere when you hit a super hot piece of metal, like 2,700 degrees hot. But without really knowing how to manage my camera very well, I can't necessarily show you guys quite how satisfying it is, but so I do my best and try to move my camera all over to see what I can get. I think my favorite shots are when the sparks completely fill the screen and it gets darker because the camera's focusing on the sparks. It just looks cool. And also with this shot right here, you can see just how many sparks are coming off of that. You really want to make sure that your floor is clean, unlike mine, as you can see, or you might be starting a fire. Now that it's cut, let's just go start forging it. So I'm going to be making it look like this. It's a simple design, but I need a video, so here it is. I'm going to start off by forging the blade with a hidden tang. This will be cedar, and if I can, this will be a strip of brass. I'll be taking the gas valve and turning it around twice. Then I will take the gas regulator and turn it until the gas pressure says it hits about 10 psi, which I find works about the best. After you light it for a furnace about this size, you want about a 2-inch blue flame coming out to get the maximum heat. I find it does take a little bit of time for the blue flame to settle down because it's not hot in there, it's still cold, so it will have to take time to warm up. These are your air valves up top. If I close it all the way, that cuts off the air for the flame, which makes it a not healthy flame, or oxygen deprived flame, makes it big and yellow. If I open it more, gives you more of the blue, really hot flame that you desire. As you can see now that it's hot, if I have about a 2-inch flame coming out of it, let's put the metal in. Right now I'm forging in my driveway, but soon I'll be able to forge in my garage, or technically my parents' garage, because I'm still living at home. As you guys could have probably already guessed, being as I don't look very old. I absolutely love this furnace. It's a little more expensive than my last one, but it heats up metal way faster. And by more expensive, I mean like $200 or something. It wasn't necessarily very expensive. The first few smacks on a curved piece of metal that you heat up are always very, very satisfying to hit. And now I'm just trying to thin the metal out. It's a little bit too thick right now. Every time I take the metal out of the furnace, it looks white on the camera, but it's actually not. It's just a bright yellow in reality. But it is still very hot. It's probably about, I don't know, like 2,600 degrees. I'm going to forge the tip of the knife out now because it'll make it easier doing it now versus when it's already have all the curves in it. You gotta admit, it is satisfying to see the metal squishing and morphing before your eyes. It was at this point in the forging process that I realized I still had a lot to learn and I was nowhere near a very good blacksmith yet, because making these curves was way more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Like, the first curve was not bad. The first curve was pretty easy to get, but getting that second curve in there for where the blade actually goes and attaches to the handle was a pain. After a bunch more beating on this thing and fighting it to do what I want, I got the first curve basically curved down. Now I just have to go and curve the second curve that's on the back where that attaches to the handle. I started off by trying to put it in the hardy hole to see if I could beat it back that way. And as you'll see in just a little bit, that did not end up working. Although it did bend it back a little bit, it more just unbent the initial curve and bent the entire thing sideways. I tried several different techniques to get it to bend backwards because it was being stubborn, and it wasn't necessarily working, and I was having a hard time, as you could see by my response here. I really have no idea what I'm doing right here. I'm struggling to get this last curve on the blade. I might try this, or something like this. Kind of put the blade on here and then beat it down in. Right now the rock is too big, so I needed to break it down. Okay, so maybe I hit it a little too hard the last smack. Let's see if this works. Honestly, when you see what I'm doing here, I think it's pretty straightforward, so I probably don't really need to explain. This is basically the only way I found that actually worked to get that last curve in. If you guys have any tips about how to make curves like that or tools that I should get, please comment in the comment section below. It was getting kind of dark at this point, but I was almost done. So after a few more beats on it to get it exactly where I wanted, I quit for the night. Because you have to be careful about heating the metal too high up in the grinding process, I like to do the majority of it before the quench. So now I'm going to grind it down as thin as I can, get all the hammer dings out and stuff before I do that. I obviously can't grind it down all the way. I don't really know what will happen. I just know that it will not quench properly. On this side, I'm going to grind the chisel grind, which is where only one side is actually ground in and the other side is just flat. It'll give it kind of like a shovel-like scooping effect, so when it hits the weeds, it'll catch, and if it catches and it's sharp, it'll cut right through. Or it's supposed to anyway. No touch.
Hot. Oh, like it sizzles?
Yeah, very hot.
That hot? Try and touch it.
Okay, back to the video. We only have about 15 seconds more of this grinding scene left, so stick along for a little bit. I'm getting close to finishing grinding on the blade, but for your guys' sake, I skipped quite a bit of the grinding process. Just remember, it did take a lot longer than it looks like on the video. Now it's time to heat treat the blade. I'm going to put it in my furnace, but because it's a little bit awkwardly angled, it was a little bit difficult to put in there, but I ended up finding a way that it would lay flat. After trying to get the heat even, I took it out so I could quench it, and then put it right back in so I could move my camera. Now that my camera is moved, I took the blade back out of the furnace to quench it in the used engine oil. It doesn't quench as well in the used engine oil. I mean, it still does quench pretty good, but just not as nicely as if it were canola oil or something like that. Now that it's cooled down sufficiently, let's take it down to the workshop to see if it hardened properly. How I test my blades for hardness is I take a file and I rub it along the edge of the blade. If it's like a rock and it just skids across, that means it hardened properly. As you can hear on this, it's skidding across the top after I get to the scaly layer. And you can hear from the tang that it doesn't skid across, it more digs in. So there's a difference. It's less obvious on camera, but it's obvious in real life. So I think this one turned out well. I'm taking the oven to heat treat it now because it's brittle, and if I don't do this step, it'll probably break when I try to use it. I'm tempering it at 400 degrees for 2 hours. Here, let me speed up this a little bit. There we go. I'll come back in 2 hours and see if it heat treated properly. 2 hours later, I come back to check on the blade, and it looks really good. It has a yellow edge, which means it's hard yet not brittle, so it's in the happy medium there. Okay, for this, I kind of forgot about the whole tang factor, so before I finish grinding down the blade, I'm going to see and cut to length anyway, my tang. Here's the prototype, and here's the knife. It doesn't completely match, but it's pretty close. I want the
tang probably to come down about here in the handle. I want it to come down really far. If I cut it right here, I should have enough tang.
I'm going to cut off the excess metal with a 4-inch cutting wheel. It's attached to an angle grinder, but I guess you could have guessed that already. I'm going to take the metal and just stick it with the rest of my metal because you could make a knife out of that. I have a lot of metal, but I still like to save stuff like that. Now that we are done with V-normalizing, I'm going to grind it down the rest of the way so that all I have to do after this is sharpen it. Like I mentioned a little bit ago, it's very important you do not grind too long on this at a time because it will heat up the blade very quickly. If the blade overheats, it will turn blue, and if you get a big enough blue spot on your blade, you're going to have to restart the heat treatment process by normalizing it, then hardening, then tempering, which takes a long time to start over and do that.
Gonna swap to the flap disc with just basically sandpaper pieces that are, make flaps. So if you see this part, a little bit of information for you. This part sticks out, this part, well, goes in. For these flat wheels, you want the sticking out part to go down so it pinches on it. But for these big, thicker wheels, you want that part to go down into it so that it can grab on and put pressure in between so it doesn't slide around. I don't know if that made any sense.
When I said flat, I actually meant thin. Those wheels are thin, not flat. I'm using the flap disc to smooth it out a little more. I don't want it really polished, but I want it definitely to be smoother so it doesn't look like there's a bunch of random grind marks. I'll be using a finer sandpaper disc angle grinder attachment to get it even smoother later. I'm making the handle for it now. I've already tried to make this handle 2 other times before, so now I'm just going to make it out of a single piece of cedar instead of a couple pieces of cedar and a piece of brass, because it just wasn't holding together and it was giving me troubles. So we're going to have a simple handle, but I mean, it'll still look nice. Once I'm done cutting this last piece, I'll show you how I'm going to use both pieces of wood. I'm going to clamp it down in the vise, and then I'm going to trace out the tang of the knife on that piece of wood. First, I'm going to start off by tracing the outline. If you can't tell, I am not a carver. I used to do some carving, but I gave that up a few years ago, so I'm not the best with carving into wood. The only part that really gives me trouble with this is that back curved area. I don't really know how to take a blade along a curve. Now that I have it outlined, I'm going to take my scoop, chisel, or whatever you call it, and just scoop out the inside little bits at a time until I have it as deep as I need it. I realized I hadn't measured how far down I needed to go, so I just took the tang of the handle and just measured it against the side so I'd have a reference point. Now that that's done, I'm going to get back to carving it all the way to the bottom. Now you can see that the tang fits all the way in. Now I'll just take the other piece of wood and sandwich it on top, then drill the holes and glue it together.
Now that we got this cut, I'm going to drill the holes in it to be all the way down there. As it's probably already very obvious, there's absolutely zero precision going into this right now.
I need to make sure that the sides of the handle scales are flat because I don't want there to be any gap in between each of them.
Handle, or scales, blade, and nail.
I use 2-part epoxy here. It's just the stuff that works. I just put about an equal amount, if I can get out of the container, on the paper and just mix it together. Then I apply it to the handle. Not too generously because I don't want there to be too much surplus, but enough so that it'll stick together strongly. I needed something to say on this clip, so I'm just going to talk how to apply the epoxy. You put it on one side, then you put it on the other. Then later, in just a few seconds, you put a nail through the hole, just like that. Then in a few more seconds, you take the other scale and, wait for it, you put it on top. Boom! I'm a genius. Anyway, now I'm just going to clamp it together and then come back in a few hours once it dries.
It's all dry now. Just gonna go take it and grind it down some.
I'm going to start off by just grinding it into a rectangle, and then from there I will go and see what shaping I like best. I try to get as many shots as possible of where I'm removing a lot of wood or a lot of metal. It just looks kind of cool, and that's probably the reason certain of my viewers are watching for the epic moment. Now that it's all squared off, I'm going to go be seeing what handle shaping I want most. I'm going to trace the tang onto the handle, just so I make sure that I don't grind into it while grinding the shaping of the handle. I did write on the wood what design I wanted, but it's in pencil, so it's very hard to see on the camera, but I can see it with my eyes. So now I'm going to grind it down. I'm going to do this part quickly, skip ahead a bunch, because I know most of you guys are probably here for the actual knife blade making section, not so much the handle making section. So I'll try not to ever make unless if they're really complicated, I'll try never to make them too long. There's only about 20 seconds left of the grinding, so we'll be done pretty soon. Just watch just a few more seconds and then we'll be done with that part. And here's what we got just straight off the belt sander. There's a bunch of sanding to do yet, but you can get pretty far with the belt sander. I have an hour or two of sanding to go now. I can't remember exactly how long it took me to do this, but it did take me a little while. I have to get it perfectly smooth because I will be polishing it on the polishing wheel a little bit later in the video. I have turned it upside down and now I'm working on the bottom side. Don't worry, this time I did remember to clean up both ends of the handles. At this point, I really think you guys know how it goes. I take 2 epoxy containers, I squirt both sides onto paper, I mix it at a rapid speed, then I fill the handle with epoxy, trying to get as much of it in the handle as I can and possible. Then I stick the tang of the knife into the handle, then I pound the nail through it. After that, I obviously cut off the first side, or one side, whichever one, and then I cut off the other side, but this is something I don't usually do. I took the nail and I started pounding it in. Although it's pretty tight in there already, this should make it so that it cannot slide no matter what, and there should be no gaps between the wood and the nail, which I always have problems with. After sanding it down again, I took it to the polishing wheel. I'm using beeswax because it gives it, it seals it, and it also looks really pretty on cedar, as you'll see in just a little bit.
This is what it looked like before. This is what it looks like now.
After I finished up polishing it, I was very satisfied with how it looked, for it really made the cedar pop in the handle and it just looked really nice. Okay, let's address the elephant in the room. I know some of you guys are wondering why I did not finish the blade before putting the handle on, and that's a good question. I started working on the handle and I got caught up working in the handle, and I forgot about the blade, so when I attached the blade, I forgot the fact that the blade wasn't finished. So because of that, I'm going to leave this blade more rustic, just because I really don't want to tear up the handle trying to get it to look nice. But at the same time, I don't want it to look ugly. So I'm going to take my grinder, mount it in the vise with a disc, and just kind of work at it a little bit with that. Please do not try this yourself. It is not safe, the wheel can fly off. If it catches just a little tiny bit, it will tear, as you'll be able to see in just a teeny tiny bit. As I'm going down, the thing hits it and it cuts. Or this one actually hurt right here. That one spun around and like smacked my hand really hard. I should have been wearing gloves. Despite it being terrifyingly sketchy, I didn't really know how to do this any other way, so I just continued doing it, being more and more careful the more I went. But even me being careful didn't avoid any incidents. And that's spinning really fast, and when those paper bits hit your hand, it hurts. I'm just finishing up the little last touches so it can have still looking like the rustic look, but still not be extremely scarred up.
So, because I'd never finished the blade before I put the handle on, I think I'm going to leave it more rustic, which means these kind of lines that you can see, I'm probably just going to leave there. So I guess here's our blade. Comfortable to hold in the hands, and you can hold it sideways too by putting your thumb in this gap and your hand wrapped around like that. I guess now, let's go try it out. Will it be able to cut thistle? Sort of. Yeah. Okay, that's not going in the video.
For a mildly sharp, one-handed scythe, it definitely does what it's meant to do. I wouldn't clear out an entire field with this, but you can get small areas where you wouldn't be able to fit an entire scythe. Here is our finished blade. Didn't turn out at all like I was expecting it to, but it turned out, and it works. If you did like this, please make sure to comment, or like, or subscribe, or do all three. If you do all three, you're amazing. If you do just one, you're still amazing. I'm a small YouTuber. At the time I uploaded this video, I had like 500 subscribers. So, yeah, subscribe. See you in the next video. Bye!